Keene. I serve as the Director of National Service Programs here, and with me is Debbie Lupton, our financial analyst, who you all know and love, and most of our National Service team, Jamie Clyburn, Erica McKibben, Program Managers, and Anitra Thomas, our Training and Grant Coordinator. So we are here to walk through your contract for the year, and how this will go is we will stop after each contract exhibit for you to ask questions. The contract webinar will be recorded and posted on the Program Director section of the Volunteer Florida website. You can refer to it later. I will say it will be most helpful to you if you actually have your contract package in front of you as we move through the webinar. And if you don't, you can certainly refer to the webinar later as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We can move to the next screen. We are really excited about our contract year and our AmeriCorps 2015-16 year. We are so excited about the programs that you have put together, the impactful service of your members, and all that you will accomplish. And our team stands ready to assist you with successful and awesome AmeriCorps programs this year. To start your year, and the fundamental elements of your contract. There's been a couple changes. I'm going to go through those. But what you've received is your contract package, which this year is your provider and commission mutual agreement and its attachments. And those attachments are the 10 exhibits that you see on the screen, in addition to the welcome letter from our CEO, the W-9, and the vendor form. So that is, in essence, your contract package. Each of these exhibits is really important. So we're going to spend some time on each of them as we move through the webinar. And the first one is your contract. So what I'm going to refer to as your 15-16 provider and mutual agreement document. As you know from our previous contracts, the provider agreement, i.e. contract, has three parts: provider agreement, provider and commission mutual agreement, and commission agreement. The piece that's individual is the provider and commission mutual agreement. Those are specific to your programs because they have to do with dollars. So that's been pulled out this year and provided to you separately. That 15-16 provider and commission mutual agreement document is the one I'm going to speak to now. It is also the one that you will print out, complete, have signed and executed by the appropriate person at your organization and return to us. That is the document that is awaiting your signature. So in the provider and mutual agreement, you'll see the term of your contract, the length of time, and under B, the contract amount. So A, total contract amount, is representative of B and D. The CNCF share, your federal award, and your grantee provider share. That's your match. Then we have the contract deductions and withholdings. You see there the amount for the Volunteer Florida Standard Evaluation, the commission fixed fee, that is directly pulled out from your e-grant budget that you included in your budget, and then also that match amount. So those are probably the most important things to pay attention to on that first page. As you move through the mutual agreement, you'll see information related to contract amendment, to termination, and to contacts. We ask that you include, when you return to us, the information for your program's primary contact, for your fiscal contact of your program, and the physical location for your administrative record. So those are places, those are parts of your mutual agreement complete prior to having it executed and signed at your organizational level. I also want to refer to page 4 that all terms and conditions are included in this. So this document is inclusive of those 10 exhibits as outlined on page 4. Debbie, did you want to add anything here?
The only thing I'd like to add is when you're looking at this for the physical contacts, please make sure you pay close attention to the grantee share. That is the amount that you're going to be held to for match. So you need to pay very close attention to that. Keep in mind it is not a percentage. It's the actual amount that's specified in this mutual agreement. So make sure you pay close attention to that.
Thank you, Debbie. Before we move on to the Exhibit 1, does anyone have any questions about the Commission and Provider Mutual Agreement? So moving on to Exhibit 1, this is your provider agreement. In other words, this is the rest of that contract. And your contract is inclusive of the provider and commission mutual agreement, this agreement, and your exhibit. So the Standard Volunteer Florida contract is what you're looking on through now. I'm not going to refer to every section in it. It's very important, though, to read this contract and to be aware of everything included in there, particularly as it relates to timelines. So the first section moves you through compliance. There's reference to federal and state statutes, as well as the AmeriCorps terms and conditions and the general grant terms and conditions on all federal awards. That is a separate exhibit in your contract package, so we'll get back to that in just a moment. So there is the information related to the compliance of these terms and conditions and the federal, other federal statutes. And then as you move through, you'll also see some Volunteer Florida specific information related to program performance measures, to training, and to member training. So this information was previously included in a prior exhibit. We've just moved it into the contract language this year. But please pay special attention to that related to the staffing that's required for your AmeriCorps program, the recruitment of your AmeriCorps members, and the additional elements that are Volunteer Florida specific. For example, your disability community development plan, your sustainability plan, and your required member training for all of your members, which are listed on page 5. This language, if you're a previous grantee, there isn't really anything new here, but if you're a new grantee, this has a lot of specific information related to the management of your program. So please do review that. Then moving on, there is our budget section. And Debbie, you want to add anything on that?
Just again, reminding you to pay very close attention to what the grantee share is. We'll talk a little more about the budget revision form and how you need to submit that if you need to do a budget revision. So basically, all of the forms that's referenced in here, we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But pay close attention to this section. There's some things in there as far as timelines that you need to be very aware of.
Thanks, Debbie. Moving through to Section H on planning and program reporting. I think this is something that is really will strengthen your programs to pay a lot of attention to in the beginning of the year, which is really being on time and on track with your fiscal and program reporting. Volunteer Florida does require quarterly progress reports from all of our programs, and in many cases monthly reports from our programs. So please be aware of those deadlines. You'll also see some training. Volunteer Florida does require our grantees to complete a fiscal online training and a national criminal history checks online training at the start of each year. We'll speak to that a little bit later, but there are a couple online trainings for you to be aware of. And Debbie, do you want to speak to the reimbursement pieces?
Sure. Kat had mentioned quarterly progress reports. I want to make sure that everyone on the fiscal side understands that is quarterly progress reports. That is not the monthly reimbursement report. The monthly invoices are due by the 15th of each month following the close of the month. So your August invoice would be due to Volunteer Florida by September 15th. So again, that is not a quarterly reporting, that is monthly. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Debbie. We moved through information related to partnership and site agreements and into some disaster preparedness language. I want you to be aware that we're very connected to the landscape of disaster mitigation and response in Florida, so there is some language that further connects AmeriCorps to that disaster response. And we can also answer any of those questions probably program by program. We do provide training and technical assistance to you and to your members as indicated here as well. We move through quality assurance and evaluation into records and documentation, assignment, subcontracts, and indemnification. So those are just sort of some other areas in the contract. I do want to speak about sponsorship call because I think that's another thing to pay attention to when you're starting up and when you're branding your program. That's section Q on page 14, sponsorship. So please be aware of the Volunteer Florida language, the requirement of incorporating the Volunteer Florida logo on your print materials, on your pictorial communication, on your email communication, and in media communication as well. If you have any questions about that, we'll connect you to Erin Dansick, External Affairs Director. We've really some exciting things happening related to branding as a whole in Florida, and that's something to be aware of as you're starting up the branding elements of your program. That AmeriCorps Florida logo is essential to include, and we want you to be aware of the inclusion of the Volunteer Florida logo as well. Debbie, anything else to add?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Any questions about the provider agreement? Okay, well, we'll move on to the other exhibits in the package. Exhibit 2 is your proposal. It is what you submitted in eGrant. It is your narrative, your budget, and your budget narrative. So these are your documents. They are combined in one exhibit, Exhibit 2. So I would say please have everybody that is working on your AmeriCorps program familiar with Exhibit 2. Have the grants team, the programs team, the fiscal team, have them all and be familiar with this narrative and this budget. It's the foundation for your program here, and it guides really everything that you're doing. For example, if in your proposal you said you were having AmeriCorps members serving in Orlando, that is where they're serving. They cannot be serving in Miami, or else that needs to be communicated and requested through the commission. So those details really are what was federally approved. So please be aware and very familiar with all 3 of those parts of your approved application. Any questions on Exhibit 2? Okay, so let's move on to Exhibit 3. Exhibit 3, everybody's favorite exhibit, the National Criminal History Check Status Form. All right, everybody.
Wake up, everybody.
This is an important one. If you haven't run your NSOPRs on your staff and members, you should stop everything you're doing and run them right now. So let me go over this with you. This is something that you will complete and submit with your first monthly invoice. We understand there may be updates throughout the year, but that the bulk of your members and your staff will have completed or initiated the background check at this point. So this is a document that is in the MicroEdge Grants Management platform for you to print out, execute, and upload again to the grants management system. So this is the 3-part federal requirement for National Criminal History Check. The NSOPW, that stands for the National Sex Offender Predator Registry, need to be completed on all staff and members associated with the federal or the match side of your budget prior to any service, work, or training hours. We've included a link there for you to find out more, but that's important to do right now. And you'll include, in this document, you'll include if the check has been completed, if it's been initiated, the date and that the check was completed or initiated, and then you'll provide that certification signature and date. And the reason we pay so very close attention to this is because program costs may be disallowed if these background checks are not completed in a timely manner on all your members and staff before any service or work occurs. So that is a review of Exhibit 3. Any questions with that?
I actually have one question. Hi, Helber from Breakthrough. If we have returning AmeriCorps members, for example, Leader Corps members, do they need to be NSOPW as well?
We do recommend that the NSOPW is run every year on every member and staff. It's quick, it's easy, and then you have that up-to-date document, yeah. However, if there's not been a break in service of 120 days or greater, you do not need to run the other components of the check. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions?
Kat, we may want to touch on that if you do get a hit, if the name comes up, that we need to verify that it's not ours and initial and sign each page.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. There are some details with these exhibits, and we could spend a lot of time on those, but that is a good one. When you run the NSOPRs on your staff and members, and if you have a name that comes up that is the same name or a similar name, you want to initial that is not the member or staff, and you want to sign off or initial that page. You also want to make sure that all territories and states are part of that criminal history check. So, for example, if you run the NSOPW and there may be Minnesota or Alabama that aren't available that day, it will state that at the top of the printout, and you want to run that check again until all 50 states and territories are included. Other questions? Okay. So we're going to move on to Exhibit 4. This is the AmeriCorps Terms and Conditions. This year, what CNCS has done at the federal level is move out the general grant terms and conditions and separate that from the 2015 terms and conditions for AmeriCorps state and national grants. We've combined that into one exhibit for you, so you have both of them. But these are the federal provisions for AmeriCorps for national service. Please be familiar with these. At the federal level, this is the backbone, I would say, of all the CNCS AmeriCorps awards. And there's some pretty important and specific information in there related to member service agreements, prohibited activities, relevant federal statutes for compliance. And this document does change a bit each year. So if you are a grantee that's been with us for a very long time, please do review these. They are one of the exhibits incorporated in your contract, and you're responsible for adhering to this information. Any questions on the terms and conditions? Okay, moving on. Exhibit 5, budget revisions. In case that ever happens to one of you on the phone today, Debbie's going to tell you how.
Okay, Exhibit 5 is what you complete. If for some reason you need a revision, you're going to have the funds in one line item, you need to move it to another line item. If the funds that you want to move is more than 10%, you need to do a budget revision. If it's less than 10%, you don't need to do this. The one thing I would caution you about is if it's member living allowance, you have to be very careful where you move this. You cannot move it to personnel expenses. You cannot move it to personnel fringe. So if it's member living allowances, you have to move it to a line item that is directly going to benefit members. So keep that in mind. You should have an Excel document that you would download, you would work from. The original budget is the budget that's in eGrants, so you're going to need that information from eGrants, which you should have. The budget changes on the form are going to be the changes that you're making, the increases or decreases. And then the revised budget, of course, there's formulas in there that will calculate that for you once you've done this. Please remember it must be signed. An electronic signature is acceptable. And before you move forward, you need to make sure that Volunteer Florida has approved that. always copy your program managers on a budget revision request, because we will go to them and ask them if this is something that is critical to your program before we make any approvals for changes. So just keep that in mind. Don't make those changes prior to getting that approval. And if you've got questions, give us a call. Let us help you with it. But the calculations should be in the Excel spreadsheet that you have. And you would just need to plug in that original budget. And then if for some reason you have to do another budget revision during the year, you're going to start that original budget using the revised budget on the first revision that you submitted. So keep that in mind, because your revised budget in the second revision would become the original budget. Now, have I totally confused everyone? Questions, anyone? Okay. Let's move on. Okay, the next exhibit is Exhibit 6, which is a contract amendment form. First of all, let me say this is something that, if we had to do, would be completed by Volunteer Florida. It would be returned to your agency for signature, returned to Volunteer Florida, and we would execute it as the new contract. A contract amendment is only necessary if you are changing, if your request is to change your award amount, which means decrease it because we cannot increase it. So if you're decreasing your award amount, or you are changing the amount of your grantee share. We don't recommend that, but if it comes to a point that we have to do that, Volunteer Florida would review your request, make a determination, and again, this is a form that we would complete, return to your agency for signature, and then you would return it, and Volunteer Florida would execute that and return a copy to you, which then would become your new contract. Any questions?
Yes, Debbie, this is Carolyn.
Hey, Carolyn.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. So would this apply, would this be necessary if you're going to change your slot agreement? You know, you already got the approval, but if I'm going to add an additional full-time member and change the slot, but not the FTE, just change the slot request. Full-time for part.
Right, Carolyn, the only time that a contract amendment is going to come into play is if the bottom line dollar figure, the award amount for CNCS or the grantee share changes. So if you're doing a slot conversion during the year and it works out to where the contract amount is going to be the same, then no, you would need to do a budget revision form for that, but it should not require a contract amendment.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So let's move on to Exhibit 7. This is the monthly invoice worksheet that you will need to submit to Volunteer Florida. These are due on the 15th of each month, no later than the 15th of the month. And in addition to this form, you need to submit all of the supporting documentation for all expenses. This includes those expenses you claim on the CNCS side and on the grantee side. And let me just say up front, and please no one be offended by this, but we have had some confusion in the past on this form. The CNCS share is the share that you are asking reimbursement for. The grantee share is what you are reporting as your match or in-kind contributions. So some people have gotten those confused and have flip-flopped them, so I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. Remember that you have to provide all the documentation to support all of the expenses on both sides. The first invoice is due 45 days after the contract is effective. So that means your August invoice is due to Volunteer Florida by September 15th. You're also going to extend that exhibit with you that shows when those background checks were completed. We're going to ask that you submit copies of the NSOPRs for all staff and for members because we're going to verify those dates. This is where those dates come into play real heavily on your financial side. Members or staff cannot have any hours claimed prior to that NSOPR being completed. So if you put someone on there and it wasn't completed, that money is going to be deducted from your invoice. So keep that in mind. That is why those dates are so very important. A new thing that we're going to ask this year is that you submit the Excel version of this document with the hard copy that you will sign. Electronic signature is acceptable. Please make sure that you date it and make sure that you get them in on time. We have to have these on time so that we can do the drawdowns that we need to do in order to pay. Something to keep in mind, and this is a hard one, but if you're late submitting, it's going to hold up your reimbursement. If you don't submit all the documentation and we have to come back to you, that's going to delay the process as well. So please try to get everything together. You can send it in a Dropbox if it's too big. If the file is too large and it won't go through, you can always use it, put it in a Dropbox and send to us. So just a couple of options there for you. Any questions? No? Wow. Okay.
So the next exhibit is Exhibit 8. This is your property and equipment inventory. And the great thing here is you do not need to worry about this exhibit till the end of the year. This is an Excel document as well. You would list your property that was purchased with a price of $500 or more, and you'd submit that at the end of the year with your contract closeout checklist, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So let's move on to that one. Your contract closeout checklist, again, this is something you don't need to look at for a while, but this is how we close out your contract year. And what you see on here is a number of areas that you will be checking off and certifying that there's a member evaluations have taken place, that timesheets are accurate, compliance issues have been resolved, expenses and invoices have been complete. So there's a number of things that you check off and certify have been concluded and completed at the end of your contract year. You provide that to your program manager, and then we process that with our finance team to get your final payment to you at the end of your contract year. But we did want to include that with your contract up front so that you have all those documents in one place. Any questions about the contract closeout process or the property inventory? Okay, and then our final exhibit, Exhibit 10. This is for you, if your checklist right now to help you manage and understand all the things you have to do right away. So here's your contract checklist, print it off, check it as you go. This is what you'll be doing and completing within the next 30 days to provide the Volunteer Florida. You'll be taking those 2 online classes, the Key Concepts of Financial and Grants Management and the CNCS National Service Criminal History Check. Those 2 classes and the links for taking those classes are in your contract, so you will complete those and send that proof to us. You'll provide copies of your insurance policies, your completed 2015 W-9 and vendor EFT authorization form, and if you haven't already submitted your most recent audit, we would ask for that as well. You will upload most of these things through the MicroEdge Grants Management System, so it will come to us through that system this year, these startup documents. And that's your contract checklist for the next 30 days. One of the most important things to do is that NSOPR background check for your members and staff. And here is your checklist. So questions about the checklist or any other questions? Okay, no other questions. Well, this contract webinar will be recorded and available to you on our website. Again, thank you for the efforts thus far in submitting strong proposals and impactful and transformative concepts. We know you're going to have a great year, and our team, our finance team, our national service team, and our entire Volunteer Florida team are here to help make that happen. So as you move through your year, your primary point of contact will be your program manager. We really appreciate your efforts thus far in getting your startup documents to us and onboarding members in the near future. So if there aren't any other questions, we will end the webinar, and this will be available to you in the near future.
We do have one chat question regarding if the question that came through the chat box is if it was purchased the previous program year, would they need to include those same items in the end-of-year equipment for this past year?
And Debbie, what's the answer on that?
No, you would not. This is looking at 15-16. So if you've purchased it with 14-15 funds, then you should include that on your closeout list for 14-15, but you would not need to include it on the 15-16.
Okay. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.